3 in the morning, a pump station. The discharge pressure gauge is reading low. An alarm's been chattering for the last 20 minutes, and the operator on shift has already tried the one thing he knows how to try. He swapped the pump, pulled the duty pump offline, brought the standby online, hoping that whatever's wrong just goes away with the new machine. It doesn't go away, because the pump was never the problem. That story, in one form or another, happens on plants all over the world, every single day. And it's not a story about a bad operator or a lazy one. It's a story about the difference between two things that sound similar but are actually completely different skills: replacing a part and solving a problem. Today, we're talking about the second one, because if there's one skill that separates a good engineer from a great one, it's not the formulas, it's not the certifications, it's troubleshooting. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Velnode Mini Podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This is a weekly podcast where we explore engineering, industrial automation, simulation, emerging technologies, workforce development, and the future of engineering education. Welcome. I've genuinely been wanting to record this episode for a while now, because I think this topic gets less attention than it deserves in almost every engineering education program out there. Let's get into it. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. When was the last time in your actual working life that you sat down and derived an equation from first principles? For most engineers, the honest answer is rarely, maybe never past university. That's not a criticism of engineering education. The theory matters. It builds the foundation everything else sits on. But there's a quiet myth in how a lot of us were trained, which is the idea that if you understand the theory deeply enough, the practical skill just follows automatically. It doesn't. I want you to think about two engineers. Same degree, same grades, same textbooks. One of them can recite the Bernoulli equation, the pump affinity laws, the NPSH formula, cold, under exam pressure. The other one can walk up to a cavitating pump, listen to it for 4 seconds, glance at 2 gauges, and tell you with real confidence that the suction strainer's probably fouled. Which one do you want running your night shift? The formulas didn't disappear for that second engineer. They're still in there, somewhere, informing the judgment. But what makes them valuable isn't that they can recite the theory. It's that they've built something the theory alone never gives you: pattern recognition under real, messy, ambiguous conditions. That is troubleshooting. And it's a skill in its own right, not a byproduct of knowing enough formulas. It has to be built deliberately, the same way any other skill does. Through exposure, through repetition, through getting it wrong in low-stakes situations before you're forced to get it right in high-stakes ones. Let's go back to that pump station for a second, because I think it illustrates something really important. Swapping the duty pump for the standby, that's not troubleshooting. That's a guess dressed up as an action. It feels productive. You did something. There's a very real, very human satisfaction in doing something when an alarm's going off and people are looking at you. But doing something isn't the same as doing the right something. Here's the distinction I want to draw really clearly, because I think it's the single most important idea in this entire episode. Parts replacers treat every fault as a hardware problem. Something's wrong, so something must be broken, so swap the something. And sometimes that actually works, more or less by accident, and it reinforces exactly the wrong lesson. Because the underlying cause, whatever actually degraded that suction strainer, or whatever actually caused the original symptom, is still sitting there in the system, waiting. Problem solvers treat every fault as a question. What changed? What's the actual physical mechanism connecting this symptom to a root cause? And critically, is this symptom even where the problem started, or is it just the place where the problem became visible? That last part matters enormously, because in a real industrial process, faults propagate. A failing bearing upstream can show up as a vibration alarm 3 pieces of equipment downstream. A miscalibrated transmitter can show up as an operator complaining that The process just doesn't behave the way it used to. The symptom and the cause are very often not sitting in the same place. Someone who only knows how to replace parts will chase the symptom forever. Someone who knows how to troubleshoot will trace it back. I've spent a fair amount of time around genuinely excellent troubleshooters, the kind of people other engineers quietly go find when something's really gone wrong. And there's a pattern in how they think that's worth naming explicitly, because it's learnable. It's not some innate gift. First, they think in systems, not components. They don't ask, what's wrong with this pump? They ask, what's wrong with this system, and where in that system does the pump sit? A pump that's cavitating isn't necessarily a pump problem. It might be a suction side problem, a level problem upstream, a temperature problem affecting vapor pressure. Good troubleshooters hold the whole process in their head, not just the piece of equipment in front of them. Second, they separate what they know from what they're assuming. This sounds obvious, but under pressure, at 3 in the morning, with an alarm going off, it's astonishingly easy to blur the two. The flow's low. Is that something you actually measured or something you inferred because the pressure looked low? Experienced troubleshooters are almost paranoid about this distinction because most bad diagnoses trace back to an assumption that quietly got treated as a fact. Third, and this one surprises people, they're comfortable being wrong quickly. A good troubleshooter forms a hypothesis, tests it fast and cheaply, and if it's wrong, discards it without ego and moves to the next one. The bad troubleshooters, the ones who get stuck for hours, are usually the ones who fell in love with their first theory and kept trying to force the evidence to fit it. And fourth, they slow down at exactly the moment everyone else speeds up. When the alarm's blaring and everyone's looking at you, the instinct is to act immediately. The best troubleshooters I've known do the opposite in that moment. They take 15, 30 seconds, sometimes longer, just to actually look at what the process is telling them before touching anything. That pause is not hesitation. That pause is the entire skill. So if this is learnable, and I firmly believe it is, what does the actual structure look like? Because think like an expert isn't exactly actionable advice on its own. Let me give you a methodology you can actually use. Step 1, define the symptom precisely. Not the pump's not working. What specifically is different from normal? Is flow low or is it zero? Is pressure fluctuating or steadily dropping? Precision here matters more than people expect. Vague symptoms lead to vague, scattershot troubleshooting. Step 2, establish what's actually normal. You cannot recognize abnormal if you don't have a clear, specific baseline for normal first. This is where experienced operators have a real advantage. They've watched that process enough to have an intuitive feel for its normal range. If you don't have that intuition yet, go find the data. Trends, historian records, previous shift logs. Step 3, gather evidence before forming a theory. I want to emphasize this order specifically because it's the step most commonly skipped under pressure. Look at every relevant instrument. Check upstream and downstream conditions. Ask what changed recently. A valve lineup, a set point, a shift handover, maintenance work. Evidence first, theory second, not the other way around. Step 4, generate multiple hypotheses, not just one. This is genuinely hard to do under pressure because your brain wants to lock onto the first plausible explanation and run with it. Force yourself to write down, mentally or literally, at least 2 or 3 possible explanations for what you're seeing before you commit to investigating just one. Step 5, test the cheapest, safest hypothesis first, not the most exciting one, not the one that would make the best story later. The one you can check fastest, with the least risk, that will actually rule something in or out. Step 6, once you find the actual root cause, verify it. Don't just assume you found it because the symptom improved. Sometimes a fault clears on its own temporarily, and if you stop investigating right there, it comes back a week later, worse. And step 7, the one almost nobody does, document what you found, so the pattern gets added to your book, and ideally your team's book, collective memory for next time. That's the loop. Symptom, baseline, evidence, multiple hypotheses, cheapest test first, verify, document. It sounds almost too simple written out like that, but the discipline is in actually following it when everyone around you wants an answer immediately. Let's talk about where this methodology breaks down in practice, because knowing the mistakes is often more useful than knowing the ideal process. Mistake 1, jumping straight to the most recently replaced component. If maintenance touched something last week, there's a strong human bias to blame it first, sometimes rightly, but often it's just the most available explanation, not the correct one. Mistake 2, confirmation bias. Once you've got a theory in your head, you start unconsciously looking only for evidence that supports it and explaining away everything that doesn't. This is probably the single most common failure mode in troubleshooting at every experience level. Mistake 3, treating a symptom fix as a root cause fix. The alarm cleared, so the problem's solved. Except it wasn't solved. It was just masked, and it's going to come back. Mistake 4, tunnel vision on the equipment in front of you, ignoring the wider process. Remember what I said earlier, systems, not components. Under pressure, that discipline is often the first thing to go. And mistake 5, maybe the most human one of all, panic-driven action. Doing something, anything, because standing still and thinking feels unbearable when alarms are sounding and people are watching. This is exactly the instinct that sent that operator swapping pumps at 3 a.m. instead of pausing for 30 seconds to actually look at the suction pressure trend. Every one of these mistakes is more likely under time pressure and social pressure, which is precisely why troubleshooting has to be practiced somewhere those pressures aren't life or death. More on that in a minute. Now, once you've actually solved an immediate problem, there's a second, deeper layer, asking why the problem happened at all, so it doesn't just come back. This is root cause analysis, and there are 3 tools worth knowing well. The first is the 5 whys. It's disarmingly simple. You ask why repeatedly, each time going one layer deeper than the last. Pump failed. Why? Bearing seized. Why? Insufficient lubrication. Why? Lubrication schedule wasn't followed. Why? Maintenance planning system didn't flag it. 5 whys, and you've gone from the pump broke to an actual organizational root cause. The power of this tool is exactly its simplicity. It forces you past the first easy answer. The second is the fishbone diagram, sometimes called an Ishikawa diagram. This one's useful when a problem could plausibly have several different categories of cause, people, equipment, methods, materials, environment, and you want to map out possibilities systematically, rather than fixating on just one branch too early. The third is fault tree analysis. This one's more rigorous, more structured, and it's especially valuable for safety-critical systems. You start from the undesired top event and work backwards, logically mapping every combination of conditions that could lead to it, often using AND and OR logic gates. It's more work than the other two, but for something like a safety-instrumented system trip or a major process upset, that rigor is exactly what's needed. None of these tools replace good troubleshooting instinct. They're what you use after the immediate fire's out, to make sure it doesn't come back. And honestly, the habit of routinely asking, why did that actually happen, even informally, even without a formal fishbone diagram in front of you, is one of the most valuable habits an engineer can build early in their career. One more thing before we get to how you actually build this skill, and it connects directly to that step 3 I mentioned earlier, gathering evidence before theorizing. The best troubleshooters I know are almost obsessive about process data, not gut feeling, not, it's probably the same thing as last time. Actual trends. If a pressure's drifting, don't just look at the instantaneous value. Pull up the trend and look at the shape of that drift. Sudden step change or slow gradual decline. Those two shapes point toward completely different root causes. A step change often means something discrete happened. A valve moved, a breaker tripped. A slow decline often means something's degrading, fouling wear, gradual calibration drift. Correlate multiple trends together too. If flow's dropping and pressure's simultaneously rising, that tells a very different story than flow and pressure both dropping together. The relationship between variables is often more diagnostic than any single variable in isolation. Guesswork feels faster in the moment. Data is faster overall because it stops you wasting time chasing a hypothesis the evidence never actually supported in the first place. So here's the honest problem with everything I've just described. Troubleshooting is a skill built through repeated exposure to real faults. And real faults on a real plant are expensive, occasionally dangerous, and frankly rare. You might go months without seeing a genuinely interesting fault. You certainly can't request one on demand to practice. This is exactly the gap simulation is built to close. Being able to inject a realistic fault into a live process simulation, a fouled suction strainer, a stuck control valve, a drifting transmitter, a nuisance PLC alarm, and then work through that exact methodology I laid out earlier, symptom, baseline, evidence, hypotheses, testing, verification, as many times as it takes safely, is how you compress years of real-world fault exposure into months. It doesn't replace the real thing, but it means that when the real thing does happen, at 3 a.m, alarm going off, everyone looking at you, you've already built the pattern recognition, and you reach for the methodology instead of the nearest spare part. Quickly, because I think concrete examples anchor all of this, troubleshooting looks slightly different depending on what you're working on, but the underlying discipline is identical. A pump losing head over time, usually where ring clearance opening up or cavitation or a partially blocked suction line, and the trend shape tells you which. A control valve that won't reach its commanded position. Could be the actuator, could be the positioner, could be the process itself physically preventing movement, and you isolate between those by checking whether the actuator's air signal matches the actual valve position feedback. An instrumentation fault, a transmitter reading that's frozen or drifting, you check it against a second, independent measurement of the same variable if one exists, because two instruments agreeing rules out an instrument fault entirely. And a PLC nuisance alarm, going off repeatedly with no obvious process cause, very often not a process problem at all, but a signal integrity issue, a poorly set alarm deadband, or genuine equipment chatter right at a threshold. Different discipline, same fundamental process. Evidence before theory, multiple hypotheses, cheapest test first. So let me close with this. If you're a student, the single best thing you can do right now is stop treating every problem set as something with one correct method to memorize and start asking yourself, for every equation you learn, what real-world symptom would this actually help me explain? If you're a recent graduate, your first year is genuinely the best time to build this habit because you don't yet have bad shortcuts to unlearn. Every fault you encounter, ask why more than once before you touch anything. And if you're an experienced engineer already, genuinely, mentor someone through this. The habit of narrating your thinking out loud while you troubleshoot, for someone junior watching, is one of the most valuable things you can pass on. It's very often the only place this skill actually gets transmitted from one generation of engineers to the next. Troubleshooting isn't a soft skill, tacked on to the real engineering. It is the real engineering. Everything else, the formulas, the standards, the certifications, those are the tools in the box. Troubleshooting is knowing which tool to reach for and knowing it before the alarms even finish sounding. That's the episode. If you want to actually build this skill somewhere the stakes are low and the faults are safe to get wrong, pump cavitation, valve issues, instrumentation drift, the whole list we covered today, you can start practicing for free at velnode.com. Thanks for listening to the Velnode Mini Podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to follow the podcast because we'll be releasing a new episode every week. Next week, we'll explore another fascinating question, and I think you're going to enjoy that conversation. Until then, keep learning, keep practicing, keep engineering.